Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar about translations offered to you by Etteplan. First of all, I would like to, short introduction about myself. My name is Manuel Comiche. You might see a different name on your screen, Barry Braster. That's a colleague of mine. I'm using his account. It's really me. It's Manuel Comiche. I'm a sales manager at Etteplan Netherlands, and I have been in the technical documentation and translation business for almost 20 years now. On your screen, you will see the topics I would like to address during this webinar. I will start with translation and the relation between translation and business goals. Also, I would like to address why good quality of translation matters, because as you probably know, many times it's still underestimated, the quality of translations, misconceptions that exist about translation, and what the consequences of these misconceptions can be in practice. Further, I would also like to, give you some advice, if you need it, about how to select the right translation partner, because of course you want to make sure that your content attached to your products is translated correctly. And the last part of the webinar, I will have a few slides that I will dedicate, to Etteplan's specifically translation business and our recently introduced online customer portal that will allow you to very easily maintain all your translation needs. The duration of this webinar is about 30 minutes. That includes, I will give you at the end about, a few minutes to ask questions as you have any. You are in the so-called listen-only modus, so you can hear me, but I cannot hear you. So my request to you is to hold your questions until the end of the webinar, but you will be given a few minutes to ask your questions, and I will do my best to answer them as good as possible. And you can type in your questions in the therefore designed question box that you will see in this webinar tool. Let's first start with translation and how translation relate to business goals. You might have, of course, many reasons why you want information, documentation, any kind of information to be translated. In business, most of the time, translation is to achieve certain business goals. So it's a means to an end. For instance, to expand business in other regions, in other countries. And in that case, you better address your target audience, so in that country, in their own native language, because that will have much more impact on them the way you deliver your information, user manual, whatever kind of information in English, for instance. Although a lot of people, of course, understand English, but your impact will be better if you do it in their own language and you do it correctly. Because if you do it correctly and your products are being used correctly or serviced correctly, that will mean that you will have more chance that your products are being sold in those countries and thus meet one of the next business goals you see here, increase the revenue for your company. But translation can actually be used for any kind of communication. It could be a newsletter you want to bring out to your target audience, or marketing material, so any kind of information, of course. And sometimes it's because of law, because you need to meet certain regulatory requirements. For instance, if you're a machine builder, and that means that you need to apply the machine directive, and one of the requirements is that you need to deliver the documentation, technical documentation in the language of the country where you're exporting your products. So in that case, there is a obligation to actually translate your information. And lastly, but not less important, is of course that you want to make sure that your product is correctly used and maintained, and that people are happy and they will keep buying your products abroad. You can expand your business. As I said, translations are still very much underestimated. And well, why should you care about translation quality, actually? Well, one of the things is that you normally put a lot of effort in doing research and development of your product, quite some money and time. You might create all kinds of marketing material, animations, well, folders, you name it. A lot of other activities that you do for your product rollout, and of course you create source documentation, user manual, installation manual, any kind of technical documentation that needs to be delivered with your product. And so you spend a lot of time and money and invest a lot, and you want to make sure that well, translations are actually the final piece of the puzzle before expanding to other regions, because it will be in the language of those people who might sell your product. So you want to make sure that the quality is good, that it's understood, it's installed smoothly or used correctly, and you don't want to nullify or diminish the time and investment, the very valuable time and investment that you put on your products. So that's a very, I believe, important reason why translation quality, you should care about it. There still are, as you probably know, quite some misconceptions about translation. The top one is that, well, you can as well use machine translation like Google Translate. Why do it differently? That works, and well, in some cases it can work. Google Translate is not that at all. So if you want to translate like a simple sentence or a word, or just to get a global impression of what is conveyed in an email, you can use Google Translate. But machines will never be able to, well, to understand the context and thus translate as accurate, for instance, as a human translator who understands the context, and much more than a machine, of course. Another misconception that translation, and that is related to machine translation, you can say it's just a matter of replacing one word by another. So that's simple, and that anyone that can speak a foreign language can translate. So if you're bilingual, you speak, let's say, Dutch and German, you could translate in German as well. Well, forget it, because there's more to translation than just being a native speaker of that language, or that translation related to the former points thus is easy and shouldn't cost that much. And lastly, that a translator can translate any kind of text. So no matter if it's a medical text, a technical text, or marketing text, which is quite different from a technical text, of course, can be translated. So all of these are misconceptions, illusions, because there's more to it. As a result of these misconceptions, what you see in practice is that companies, well, in order to save costs, for instance, they decide to have their own bilingual personnel translate their technical documentation or any kind of documentation, or that they might have resellers in different regions, different countries they want to export to, and they have their resellers do the translations because, well, that will save costs, right? Or Google Translate is used, as I said, you might get very funny or totally incorrect translation. And in some cases, information will not be translated at all because the belief is that, well, it's not read at all, so why spend money on it? So that's the practice. And the result of these consequences is that you will get a very poor translation quality. If you do it if you translate your user interface, I know examples and I won't mention them, but if you have your user interface, for instance, translate with Google Translate, that means that or by non-native, I mean by non-professional translator, your marketing material might not be convincing. You will lose control or have no control at all about the information that is communicated to your target audience. For instance, in the case that I mentioned, that you have your resellers translate information, you are not sure, will not be sure if the translation they created matches the original message that you had in your source documentation. You actually lose control. Inconsistencies, that's very likely to be introduced in your technical documentation because non-professional translators are not using tools enabling them to reuse technical terms, for instance, to make sure that all technical terms are translated consistently. You might even get liability claims if you do not translate. You have an obligation due to the machinery directive, and what started as a belief or an action to save costs, at the end it might end in the overall cost being higher than if you would simply have sent it out, outsourced to a professional translation company, and that will mean that your business goals that you set might not be met simply because your products are regarded as lousy. They don't function because the user instructions are not clear, or the installations are not clear, so it might damage your reputation. These are some examples I just Googled it and thought they were funny, so I just copy-pasted them in here, but you will find much more if you Google yourself of the result of that you will get if you, for instance, use Google Translate to take care of your translation. Like I said, you will have much more impact if you communicate with your target audience in their own language and do it correctly, of course, because you want to make sure that your machine, for instance, is installed smoothly, that they're happy with your machine, that the customers are using your products as you designed them to be used, as you intended them to be used, and that the servicing of your products can be done efficiently, meaning that if your translation cannot be understood or is incorrectly, that means that the service engineer might not need one visit to repair the machine, but might even need 2 or 3 visits to repair the machine. That means that the downtime of the machine will be bigger, and that you cannot meet the promise that you made to your customer of 90% uptime of the machine. So these are very important consequences to take into consideration when you decide how to translate your information. Talking about cost, let's spend a minute on what determines the cost for translations. As most of you probably will know, there are direct costs. The cost for translations are mainly, not mainly, but they're determined by the number of words. So the document or documents that you need to translate and the number of words in those documents, the number of languages. There is a difference, of course, if you have your documents translated in 2 languages or in 10 languages. What languages? Traditionally, for instance, Asian language or Eastern European languages will be cheaper than Western European languages or Scandinavian languages. So that will determine your final price for translation, but also the file formats. If your documents are set up in Word, you will not only have to take into consideration the number of words or languages, but also the fact that after translation, you or your translator will have to fix the layout of the documents. For instance, English is of course a very concise language, but if you have your text translated into German, German will need more words, and that means if you have set it up in Word or FrameMaker or that kind of traditional tools for your technical documentation, you will need more time for fixing the layout into those languages. So those are the most direct costs that you that we have for translations. But there are also indirect costs, which are less transparent than the direct costs we just discussed. And that is the time that you spend yourself on preparing the material, an email to your translation partner, for instance, about the documents that need to be translated, specific instructions you might give, the actually outsourcing and sending of the files. You might be able to attach to email, but maybe your files are too big and you have to use WeTransfer, and the time that you need for tracking the translation status of your documents, because you want to make sure that you receive them on time. So these are costs that are but are less transparent. But also, like I mentioned before, that is the indirect cost for maintenance. In case you deliver poor translation, that service maintenance cannot be done efficiently. So those are indirect costs that can be very high, actually, much more higher than the initial direct cost that you have for translation. And lastly, reputation damage. If you deliver poor translations, and people might get very negative image of your products because of the lousy translations you delivered, and they were not able to correctly use your product, so they're not using it anymore. And I don't know, they might post it on the internet, so that might actually damage your reputation. So I also would like to give some kind of tips. So we have seen that quality is important, and therefore you should look for quality and look beyond simply direct costs like word prices and turnaround times. So instead of simply sending your documents out to 5 translation agencies and have them provide you with a quotation, it's better to look beyond that, because it doesn't tell you anything about translation quality they will deliver. So make sure that the translation partner that you choose, that he or she has profound knowledge of your business, of your subject matter. There is extensive experience with your subject matter, that they actually understand your products, the documentation, technical documentation that you created, it's understood correctly, and that professional translation tooling is used to make sure that, if professional translation tools are used, all your translation will be stored in so-called translation memories, so databases on sentence base that will allow translators to reuse translations, and that way make sure that your translations are translated consistently, so that there's consistent translation, and thanks to the reuse, they won't have to start all over again from the beginning when they have to translate a new document. Simply by reusing translations that were used before, you can reduce your turnaround times, but also your cost, of course. The less that needs to be translated, the lower your cost will be. And call it at a fair price. I'm not saying that you should compare translation agencies. It's always good to make a comparison, whatever you want to buy. So it's good to have some kind of indication if you have a good a fair price for your translations. So this first part, these first topics were more general about business goals and goals and translations, and why translation quality is important, of course. What you should consider when outsourcing your your translation. I would like to spend about 5 more minutes. It's a bit of a commercial part about Etteplan and our translation services. You could say that technique is in our DNA. We're about 3,500 employees, and most of them are engineers. So very much into technique in all kind of areas of engineering. And another service that we offer is for instance, that you have machines and that you have sensors gathering all kinds of information, allowing you to do predictive maintenance on your products. So Internet of Things solutions, that's what I was looking for. And lastly, the service that we offer, and that's what we are today talking about, is our technical documentation and technical translation services, because that's what we're good at. Technique. We have a lot of technical people. We have a lot of technical translators with a lot of experience in many technical areas. So that is, if you have technical documentation to be translated, I think we would be a good alternative. In some specific cases, if we're dealing with very specific technical content, we might even have a last review by subject matter experts in the field to make sure that for 200% that it's that we, for instance, have used the terminology that should be used. Our translation services are based on the so-called ISO 17100 standard, and that is a standard that provides requirements for the core processes of translation. So when it comes to resources and other aspects necessary for delivering a quality translation services. But we also not to forget that we are ISO 9001 certified and I will show you in a minute, recently introduced our online portal that will allow you to easily manage all your translation projects. And lastly, of course, I believe that well, we not only deliver good quality, but also fairly competitive prices. I would also like to give some tips, not only focus on translation, well, it has a relation with translation, and that is your source documentation. You could have the best translator in the world translate your technical documentation, but if the source text is not clear, ambiguous, your translations you cannot expect your translations to be okay. That simply doesn't exist. Since it all starts with the basis, with your source documentation, your source content. And well, one of the tips is that for improving, to make sure that your source text is clear, is understood, that it is not ambiguous, that the correct technical terms are used and that they are used consistently. You could apply simplified technical English. This standard, existing of approximately 60 writing rules, will allow you to create technical documentation that is clear and unambiguous and save costs. Since one of the writing rules, for instance, is that you should not use, I believe, more than 22 words for procedural checks. So it will allow you, this standard, to both create clear documentation and create concise documentation, which, as we have discussed, the less words you have, the lower your translation cost will be. But it's not only about text. Also, instead of using text, you could very well use these kind of clear illustrations that we create as well at Etteplan based on your 3D models. We can do that, and this will allow you to include instructions actually in the illustrations themselves, meaning that you will need less words to explain how things need to be installed or used. So less words, again, will mean that you will have less cost for translation. Okay, and there it is. the promised online customer portal we recently introduced. Online 24/7. This is the login page. You will have your own username and your own password, allowing you to log in into your companies, into your own environment where you can manage all your products, all your projects. It's very user-friendly. For instance, if you need to request a quote, forgot about having to type in an email, writing instructions, or sending your files over via WeTransfer, a wizard will help you to very easily request a quote. What you here see is, for instance, that you first need to select the languages in which you want to have your documentation translated. In the next step, you will have the possibility to select and upload the files that you would like to have translated. And then the system will give you an overview of the documents that you uploaded and the number of words and characters per document. And finally, it will provide you with an overview based on the selections you made on the former tabs. And if it's all okay, on the bottom of the page, you see this request quote button that you obviously can use if you agree and you want to receive your instant quote. Indeed, you will have an instant quote, so you won't have to wait. You will receive it, and then you can decide whether you agree or not by approving that quotation. Very nice feature of our online portal is this dashboard that will allow you in one overview to receive the most important information for you to track your translation projects. So we'll provide you with an overview of your running projects, of your closed project, of your quotations. You might have unpaid invoices. So all kind of information, your contacts, all information that you require to easily manage all of your translation projects. And this will, of course, I'm sure that, take less time for you to manage your translation projects. I've summed up in this slide the benefits for you of this of using this online portal. Like I said, it's 24/7 available. So if you want to spend your weekend sending a translation request, it's available. No more need for typing in emails or sending files via WeTransfer. User-friendly, which will save your time. For your online requests for quotations, like I said, you will have an overview of the most important information for you. But it's also a central environment, central repository, where you can find all past quotation or translated documents that were delivered to you in the past. So you will have all you need in one easy and overview, and that will make life easier for you. And finally, you can generate all kinds of financial reports. For instance, if you would like to know what your spendings for translation were last year, or you might have different offices all over the world and you want to see the total cost, the total expenses for translation for your company, that you can generate these kind of financial reports as well. Okay, that was the last slide that I prepared for this webinar. If you have questions, if something is not clear, we will have a few minutes where you can give in your questions. Like I said at the start, you will have this question box. So please go ahead. If anything is not clear, if you have a question, type them in and we'll try to answer them as good as possible. Please go ahead if you have any questions. You might have a question at a later stage. That's fine too. You can always send me, or if you go to our website, send us an email with your questions, and we'll gladly to help you further and make things clear. We'll help you to set up an account for you for your company. Okay, let's see. I have one question. The question is, what about formats for input and output? Well, you can upload any kind of document. So whether it's a Word document, it's an XML document, it's a PDF. So any kind of document you can upload for translation, for providing you a quote, and we will deliver the translation in that same format. I'm not 100% sure that is your question, but in case that's not, maybe we can talk about it, Jan, at a later stage, if that's not what you mean. Any more questions? Okay. If no more questions, thank you very much for your attention and your time. And we will be very glad to hear soon from you. If you have any technical information, technical documentation to be translated, we will be at your service always. So thanks again, and hope to hear from you soon. Have a nice evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.